Today's episode is brought to you by Chords, makers of award-winning professional-grade connectivity solutions designed by integrators for integrators. If you're listening to this podcast, you already know that reliability is crucial. That's why professionals around the world choose Chords. Born in Australia and trusted in over 50 countries, Chords provides robust, fast and effective HDMI, audio, networking, USB-C and control cabling engineered for residential, commercial and mission-critical applications. With over 20 years of experience and a promise of connectivity assured, every Chords product is tested, certified and backed by expert support. Level up your installs today by visiting chords.com.au. That's KORDZ.com.au. Hello and welcome to Master Integrator, the podcast where design, technology and people come together in the modern home. I'm your host, Paul Skelton. There's a conversation happening in quiet corners of our industry. It's not about cabling standards or control systems. It's about safety, about lived experience and how the technology we install might one day help someone survive. Now, this isn't hypothetical, and it's not really technical either. This is a very human subject. Today, I'm speaking with Melody Gross, a domestic violence survivor, advocate and founder of Courageous Shift. Melody works with individuals and organisations to educate, empower and push for systems that protect those at risk, especially in their own homes. She's not a technology professional. She doesn't install sensors or program control systems, but she does know what it means to feel unsafe in a space that should be secure. In this conversation, Melody and I talk about what it feels like to lose control in your own home, why integrators need to think about who is controlling a smart system, not just how it works, the warning signs, red flags, and opportunities to help, and how even the smallest installation choices can make a difference to someone living with abuse. This is a tough topic, but it's an essential one. We're at a point where the lines between personal safety and technology design are blurring, and that means integrators have a responsibility to consider the human impact of their work. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our sponsors for making these conversations possible. Chords, offering reliable connectivity solutions for professional installations, and Connected Magazine, your trusted resource for the smart home and AV integration industry. So let's get into it. This is Master Integrator. Here's Melody Gross. Start with a little bit of your background. Can you share a little bit about how you started with Courageous Shift, what the idea was behind that, and a little bit about your background and your experience working with domestic violence and survivorship?
Yeah, sure. Not a problem. So, it's interesting. I say that my experience with domestic violence actually started well before I jumped into this career. And so I witnessed a lot of intimate partner violence growing up amongst family members. And I didn't think that shaped me until it did. Right? So when I left my hometown of New York, I'm originally from New York, if people can't recognize the accent, but I left there and I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina. And for a short period of time, I was in an abusive relationship. Not one that I expected, not one that I remotely saw coming, but it did and it happened. And for nearly 3 years, and I experienced a lot during that time. And I'm sure we'll get into this, but once I left, I had a whole career. Like I had a 15-year career in marketing and communications, mainly working with nonprofit agencies for a really long time. But I started to not feel fulfilled about it. And at the same time, I started sharing a little bit about my story. It started out as journaling because I couldn't afford therapy. And then it turned from journaling to blogging, and then blogging to being asked to speak. And I don't know if it was because of my career in marketing communications where you learn the gaps and like, how do you close the gaps in things? And what I realized is there were some gaps in supporting survivors. So that's really what led me to building out Courageous Shift, where I said, okay, when I wasn't home, I was at work. And yet my experience was impacting my work. And I didn't realize that a lot of organizations don't really have plans or programs or policies to even address domestic violence, even though it impacts the workplace a lot. And so that's what kind of led me to that. I saw that some people were doing work, but that work around, okay, if I'm not at home, I'm at work. And if I'm not at home, that person knows where to find me, right? And it's usually at work. And so that's kind of what led me to that and branching out to doing speaking engagements and workplace training and building policy for them.
So you mentioned that there's obviously a few gaps in the market. I don't know what to call it, whether we call it the market, the sector, or
Mm.
it sounds so trivial
Yeah,
when you
I
say
mean,
it like
I
that.
know, no, I totally understand. I mean, sector's fine, I guess, yeah.
Let's go. Okay, sector. So what were some of those that you noticed, and I guess what you thought would have been helpful when you were dealing with it personally?
Great question. So what I noticed was that even though organizations would do surveys and they were being asked about if domestic violence impacted the workplace, they would say yes. A majority of them would say, yeah, it does. And yet they didn't have anything in writing, any kind of policy that actually addressed it. So oftentimes, if a situation with an employee experiencing domestic violence, they'll usually just send it to HR or tell them that that's not their problem, which is what I've heard from survivors. And so there was this gap in policy. There's a gap in recognizing and responding to it. And then there's a gap in even awareness of how it impacts the workplace. And so that's where I come in and say, here's how it's actually impacting you: your productivity, your safety and security, your healthcare budget. Like, it's impacting all of these different areas, along with what people don't realize is workplace violence. Most people don't know that I think it's about 25, 27% of workplace violence incidences are directly related to domestic violence. So that means that it's not staying
Wow.
at home. Right. All right. They're very shocking. Oh, now let me add, these numbers are for the United States. I don't know across the country, the world, but it is for the United States. It's 25%. That's still high. Whenever I give that number out, I usually get that response like, holy crap. Like, yeah. Yeah.
That's significant. And it's
Yeah.
it's kind of terrifying. That's so high.
Yeah, it's pretty high. And what I realized let me say this, the organization that I worked for during that time, they were amazing. They were really supportive. The interesting thing was that, and what shifted me into doing this work too, was I wasn't the only survivor working there. There were like two other women who had experienced intimate partner violence while working there. So in a way, they knew what to do, but there still wasn't quite a policy or procedure to actually do it. It was kind of winging it which is fine. You want to be flexible. But that's what really made me go, okay, there's a disconnect here. Maybe we can work this out.
So when you do have these, I guess, consulting sessions with employers, with business owners, directors, whatever it might be, and they recognize there's an issue,
Yeah.
how receptive are they actually then to implement the changes, and how adaptive have they been? Because I know in my experience when I talk to a lot of business owners, especially small business owners, it's a case of, oh yes, I need to do that. I understand absolutely. But then
Yeah.
life gets in the way and they don't actually
Yeah.
follow through. So
Yeah.
what has the implementation been like? And
Yeah.
I guess how drastic of a change has there been with some
Yeah.
of these companies you're working with?
Yeah. So it honestly varies. And oftentimes, even though I share about it, I talk about it, you can see it on my LinkedIn, it's only until an incident happens that they actually call me, right?
Mhm.
It's hardly ever proactive. It's usually reactive. If something happened, an employee disclosed something, or there was an actual incident, and so therefore they'll say, "Hey, Melody, we need to talk to you." That's usually the catalyst for it. It's hardly ever proactive. Some folks do, but for the most part, no. They wait until the moment. Yeah. And I think
Does
a
that?
lot of that is because they don't think it's gonna happen to them. They don't think that it actually will ever come to their doorsteps. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and that seems to be the common theme I guess, across most of these things where no one assumes it will happen to them.
Yeah.
I mean, you yourself said that in the situation you found yourself, you weren't expecting it.
Yeah.
So it makes sense, but in a sad way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really unfortunate. I would hope that, it's interesting because companies talk a lot about planning and strategic planning and preparing and preparation and all of that stuff. But when it comes to this particular situation, and some other ones as well too, they're hesitant to do that. And a big part of that is because it's still seen as a personal issue. It's still seen as something between two people, right? And so that's where the heavier lift is actually getting them to understand how it impacts, like building that awareness for them so that they really understand, actually, this is going to impact you. And you may not even realize it's impacting you because you're not asking your employees, because you're not talking about it, you know? So when you get that opportunity to actually talk about it and share, then you may realize, oh, this may be an issue much more than I thought. Yeah.
So would that be the biggest misconception out there in the sector about what domestic violence is or how it affects people? I mean, is that what you notice, or are there other misconceptions out there that you kind of run into quite regularly?
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the misconceptions is that it doesn't impact anybody else but the two people that's it's involved in. The other thing I think is a lot of times organizations feel like they don't have the resources to actually do something about it because they think it's a heavy lift to do something about it. The other thing I find is that organizations will want to do something, but may not want to make the investment in it, right? They may not see the ROI in it, like
Yeah.
if you buy new software, you will see the ROI for that, right? If you hire someone to build something, you can see the ROI on that. But you think you can't see the ROI in supporting an employee who's experiencing domestic violence. And so what I tell them is, here's a case study of what it looks like when an employee is supported and an organization actually addressed it. So I had a client who has known me for years. Like this woman has known me for years. And she knew the work that I did. And what happened was one day she calls me, she says, "Hey, do you have time to chat?" And I was like, "Sure." I didn't know what was going on. When I was in marketing communications, I had actually did some freelance work for her. So I was like, oh, maybe she kind of needs, see if I'm open to doing a little bit more, right? So, okay, cool. Well, she gets on the call. She says, "Hey, I have an employee that just shared that they're experiencing domestic violence." And I said, "Okay." She says, "Okay, so what can we do?" And one, I said, "Well, thank you, first of all, like actually deciding to do something." Now, let me preface this by saying this was an organization the size of 20. There were only 20 people there. So that's the other thing. I think people think if they have a small company that it won't impact them. This was a company of 20, right? And they had an employee experience in it. So what we decided to do was, one, I came in and I trained their leadership on how to recognize and respond to domestic violence, what to say, what not to say, how it impacts, what are the actual definitions, what is it that their employee is experiencing, right? I talked to them about that. I talked to them about the impact on the organization. Again, productivity, healthcare costs, safety and security, pulling all that together. Then what I also did was provided some one-on-one coaching for the employee who was experiencing intimate partner violence. And we did a number of sessions because, yes, I am a certified professional life coach, but also I'm a survivor. So there's still this, like, I understand. Like, I may
Yeah.
not have gone through exactly the same details, but there is some semblance of, I understand. I can be very empathetic to this because I truly understand what that's like. And then the other thing was we developed their policy for going forward, right? If in another, what will they offer? How much time will they give off? How to request that? Who do they request that to? Like all of those different steps. And that really tied it in. The other thing I just remembered that I offered was also some leadership coaching for the manager who was supervising the employee. And that was really important because what came out of that was she was triggered by the experience because of her childhood and how it showed up. And so she had to understand, how can I manage or, support this employee, my employee that I care about, and also recognize my own stuff and still get the work done. And that's where I think people get caught up. They're scared that they won't get the work done. It's like, no, 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 no. People want their jobs. They need their
Yep.
jobs. And
Especially
so what
today.
happened,
Yeah.
especially today. And what happened was, from all of that, the employee actually ended up thriving. They were able to keep their home. They were able to get the services that they need, and they stayed at the organization and did really well for the organization too, or won awards for it. So that's what happens when we take a step back and say, I know this is hard, like I know this is troubling, but also how can we support this employee because we're pouring into someone who's absolutely going to stay loyal to us. And it was beautiful. And we calculated the numbers. I believe with all of that, we saved this organization of 20 about $16,000. Not a big thing.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
So you mentioned some of the kind of the resources and investment that companies can make in this. I mean, what could they potentially do at a very base level to be helpful without spending a huge amount of money? Because obviously a lot of companies don't have a huge amount of money, especially when we're talking about small businesses, but there's obviously things they can do. So what are some of those steps they can take to make sure they have a policy in place?
Yeah. So one of the steps that they can take is training managers and supervisors of how to recognize the signs. Sometimes an employee is not going to disclose. So how do you go to them to have that conversation? What do you say? What do you not say? How do you build that trust with them? One of the things that I talk about is trust building questions that are survivor centered. So that's one thing. Two, you want to know what your local resources are. There are domestic violence agencies across the world. Now, they're not all accessible, let me be clear, right? Sometimes when you go into more rural areas, more country areas, you may have some challenges. But at least if you know what those local organizations are, you can then point that person to, you can at least provide them with that, right? The other thing is, and I'm gonna flip it a little bit, sometimes the employee is the abusive person or the person accused of being abusive. So now you have to also recognize that, like, have they used company equipment to harass or contacted them during company time, things like that. So you want to be mindful of that. You want to also know what your laws are because I've spoke with survivors and they've lost their jobs and legally they were not supposed to lose their jobs. So you want to be sure about that.
What was the logic behind that? Because I can't see why someone... Yeah, I can't see the logic behind that.
So for them, the logic is doesn't have anything to do with work. This is your personal life and it's influencing the professional life. That's the thought process. Okay. And again, that's why I come in and say, well, actually, not quite, because really what happens is everyone can be in danger. Again, we talked about workplace violence, right? And so when we go into organizations, let's say you and I, Paul, are married. And I've not been nice to you. I've not been good to you, right? There's been some like really scary behaviors. And you decide, Melody, I've had enough. I'm leaving. The most dangerous time for a survivor, and I often call them survivors versus victims, the most dangerous time is when they leave. So now you've decided to leave me and you're going to work. Well, I know you're not home, but I'm going to follow you to work because you can't leave me. And so now I'm going to hurt you at work because you can't leave me. But I've put everyone else at risk as well. All of your colleagues, securities run, things like that. It puts everyone else at risk. Versus if you had an organization that was open and having these conversations and understanding the impact, you could potentially go to them and say, your manager or even HR to say, I'm going through some things at home and I think I need some support. I think I need some help. I don't really know. I don't really want to leave, but I could use some help. And then they can take it from there. But ignoring it is not going to make the problem go away.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Okay. So you said there a couple of times you kind of to organizations about what to say and what not to say. Mm-hmm. What are some of those examples of what not to say?
Oh, yes. Perfect example. And we say this even in our regular lives, even outside the workplace. Survivors are always asked, why don't you just leave? That's the number one question that we get asked. Why don't you just leave? And that's not something you want to ask because you're also saying, even though you may not realize it, you're also saying, this is your fault, do something about it. And the reality is, and I really want people to understand this, the reality is survivors, we do not have any control over the actions of the abusive person. We don't. If we did, we would get them to stop. Think about it. If we really had some kind of control, we would actually get them to stop. But we don't. And that the whole point of domestic violence, if you take nothing else away from this, is that it is about power and control over someone else. That is ultimately what it's about. And so there are many reasons why survivors don't leave. One, it's dangerous. Two, they don't have resources. Three, there have been threats of violence. They've been threatened that if you leave, this will happen. Their children may be threatened. Their pets may have been harmed. So that's asking, why don't you leave? It's never going to work because they may want to leave. But ultimately, we really just want them to stop abusing as well. Like, that's the big thing. Another thing that is asked sometimes is, why is this my problem? Why is this my problem? And to that, I say, because potentially you can lose an employee who's actually really valuable, right? Sometimes not every person who's experiencing intimate partner violence is slacking on the job. Some are because it is the stress, right, of what's going on. But then there's others who actually are really working really hard. I know a survivor who, actually a few survivors who they just poured themselves into their work in order to not think about that. And so it
I
is the
imagine it's
problem
their
because it's
escape.
important. Yeah, exactly. It's their escape. It definitely was for me, my escape. So there's that, asking, how is this my problem? And then I listed all those other reasons: safety, security, productivity, healthcare risk, employee wellness for everyone. Another question that sometimes they ask is, what is the ROI in supporting them? What is the ROI? So I go through that again, and the cost is really not necessarily a cost of financial gain, but it is a reduced cost, if that makes sense. You're
Yep.
reducing the cost by actually addressing it versus thinking that you'll get money out of it. And you may, in the long run, the person is staying, they're loyal, they're productive, then yes, you will. But at the same note, it's really a cost savings measure by addressing it.
So the people who will be listening to this podcast, they'll be working in a technology industry, so smart home technology. When we talk about domestic violence, I guess most people have in their mind physical abuse. There is growing awareness that it could be emotional, coercive control, financial abuse. With your experience and what you're seeing in the sector, how has technology changed, I guess, the type of abuse that's being delivered, but also the profile of the abuser?
Yeah. People are tech savvy. And unfortunately, some of the laws haven't caught up. But people also think that with technology, they have some distance between their abuse. Can you really prove that I've actually hacked into your account? Can you really? Right? Like, can you prove And so I think that we have to have this awareness that technology is going to be used more and more now, much more than it was before. And even during my own experience, which was almost 10 years ago, there was the use of technology. And I think we need to broaden that. When we think, we don't just think social media. So technology is just like, I have a phone and I'm constantly harassing you via text messages. like that's technological abuse, right? I'm constantly doing that. Messaging people on social media or pretending to be me to someone else, creating whole new profiles. But then also, I have a Ring camera, right? I have a Ring camera. And if I'm living with someone who has access to that Ring camera, they can cut it off, come in, and I'll never know, right? I'll never know. There's so many ways that technology is being used to perpetuate abuse. And unfortunately, our laws are not catching up to it. And I can speak for that across the world. Like, it's not catching up to it, and it's really unfortunate. Yeah.
So is there other things that can be done then? Because the laws, as far as I'm concerned, laws will never catch up because technology moves too quickly. So are there other things or other people who should be involved to be aware of those warning signs to make sure that technology either isn't being used in a nefarious way or potentially couldn't be used in that way?
Yeah. So we have to think about how we use technology ourselves. So sometimes we use technology for information. Sometimes we use it for fun. We use it for all these different things. But thinking about how it can be nefarious. For instance, in the US, there was a battle between two rappers. I won't necessarily call them out, but a battle between two rappers. You may have heard about it. I feel like it might have reached everywhere. Okay. So, and one of them used AI to have two different rappers say lyrics on their song. Someone else who already existed, they used their voice, right, in the rap battle, which as a hip hop enthusiast, I was highly offended. However, but imagine what that looks like for everyday people who don't have the technological skills or insights to question anything. You know, you call someone on the phone and they're using AI to sound like me. That's scary. And so I don't know if I have the answer to like, how do we actually, because I just think about the work that it takes and the fight that it takes. What I do tell survivors is to document everything. If someone comes to you and says, hey, I got a weird message from you, you know, it's like, that wasn't me. Okay, write that down, document it. Because what I say is CYA, cover your ass. And you have to do that even as a survivor, because along with technological abuse, there's the legal abuse as well, too. And so we just have to be mindful and stay up to date with the trainings around technology, even if we don't necessarily use them. You know, I fought tooth and nail. One of my good friends is as a tech person. She's been in tech for years. And I fought tooth and nails about using AI. And she said, Melody, if you don't get it together and jump on board and do it, I was like, no. But then I finally, you know, I don't use it for art because I'm a creative. I support creatives. I can't do it for that. But if I need a plan, it's going to use it. So I think that I'm diverted. I apologize. But I think that we have to be mindful of ever-changing technology and truly understand. It goes back to looking at those gaps. What are the gaps that are missing from how to keep survivors safe through the use of technology? The other thing is, if you have a business and it's focused on technology and tech and AI and everything like that, talk to survivors who have actually had these tools used against them. That gives you some insight, you know? That gives you some kind of, okay, where's the gap? We're missing something. Where's the safety measures? You know? That's a big part of it, I think, is just like listening to survivors, being sure about safety measures, and going the extra mile of determining what are the gaps in that, and pushing and supporting legislation that actually addresses technological abuse. I think those are the core things, a part of it too.
Connected Magazine is your go-to publication for the commercial and residential AV and smart home industry. The votes are in. The AV industry has spoken in the 2025 Most Popular Awards, with results across more than 40 categories. The awards section also profiles this year's most influential person, the former Golden Paul, if you will. Check out this and more in the latest edition of Connected, plus the website for all your AV news and new products. Links are in this episode's description. So looking at your hesitance around AI, and I definitely think that's a global thing. A lot of people are very hesitant and reluctant to go down that path. But at the same time, that's not going to stop it from being used out there in the broader technology industry. So how important is digital literacy and awareness among survivors, and how or what services are available to actually making sure they're aware of things that can happen to them?
That is a great question. Digital literacy is probably going to have to be a priority very soon, if not like yesterday. It's going to have to be that, because you don't know if someone, let's picture this, someone who has been married for years, 10, 20 years. And they've been in this controlling, abusive relationship all this time, right? All this time. But their partner is the one who controls the bills, the internet, everything. They don't have the digital literacy. So what we need to do is support organizations that are offering that or fill that gap. For instance, there may be a domestic violence agency, right, that is addressing intimate partner violence, but they may not have the tools or the platform or even the capacity to focus on digital literacy. So how can these organizations, these companies who are doing this work in the tech space, what can they do as their corporate social responsibility, right? As their means of connecting with community and providing survivors with digital literacy? That would be amazing, right? That would be amazing that like they know they can do that. Also, there are some online tools where there's some toolkits that talks about digital literacy and technological abuse. There are some of them, but I don't even think that, as agencies, we're really catching up as well too. And you've given me more ideas.
Well, that's a good thing. That's
Yeah,
because you get
yeah,
ideas
I'm with it.
from
Yeah,
everywhere.
yeah,
Yeah, because I think that also goes back to what you just said there about covering your ass. And that
that's
is,
right.
if you don't know that it could be
Mhm.
exploited as a way to
Yeah,
track you, how are you meant to cover yourself?
absolutely. And abusive people rely on survivors not knowing, not questioning anything. They rely on that. It's how they've been able to build that up. And so having something that kind of like disrupts that, I'm a big part of disruption, like disrupts that pattern of only listen to me to say, wait a minute now. And then even afterwards, how do they protect themselves afterwards? And one of the things that I do talk about is some of that technological abuse. I'm not a tech person, but I do know how, even from a basic form, how technology can be used to continually harm someone. I know someone who they could not get a profile because their abusive person continued to create new profiles of them consistently, consistently, consistently. That is a lot. That is a lot of
Yeah,
work.
it
It's
is.
a lot of
And I
work to
think,
do that. Mhm.
and people don't always recognize or understand the persistence that some people apply
Right.
to this. And
Yeah.
probably the most egregious one that I've heard, it was in
Mhm.
Queensland, here in Australia. It was a survivor of domestic violence. So she actually realized that her partner was tracking her using Apple AirTags around her house.
Yeah.
So she
Wow.
called in the police, went through all the right steps, and then they removed 8 different AirTags
Yeah.
from her belongings. But then the tracking continued, and she actually realized that while the police were inside the house, her former partner was outside putting AirTags on her car. So he was
Oh,
watching the police and still doing it anyway. So,
yeah.
yeah, I think a lot of people don't
Yeah.
realize how persistent they are, and the police and
And
law
air
enforcement.
they add up. Like, after a while,
Yeah.
the cost of them add up, and that should let you know how determined someone can be if they truly wanna control someone. The cops were there. There was a risk of this person being arrested, and they would rather take that risk so that they continue to stalk, because that is stalking, to continue to stalk someone, and that's the other thing. I think we need to understand the overlap of abuses, right? So, like, that is stalking using technology, right? And that's really scary. And so we have to understand that overlapping, but I can see that happening with AirTags. I could see it happening with Ring cameras, people being able to hack into people's computer laptop cameras and all of that stuff. And if you are not aware of these things, you will not know. And you won't know how to address it. And I think that overall, the gender-based violence sector is trying their best to catch up, but there's just so much more. And I think it's a great opportunity to partner with tech folks to offer that up for as an added precaution for survivors.
So, what about law enforcement from your experience? Because ideally, they'd be across the technology as well, but they're not necessarily technologists. So, are you finding that they're more receptive to the idea of technology being involved in domestic violence, or because they don't understand it, is there still that fight to constantly believe the survivor.
Yeah. Law enforcement is there for enforcing laws. And if there are no laws on the books, they can't enforce anything. That is an unfortunate, sad truth. If there are no laws around technology and technical abuse, they don't have anything to reference. And so you may get someone who says, okay, this seems a little off. Let's dig a little deeper. Let's talk to our tech team and see whatever. Let's see what we can dig up. It is sometimes you'll get those people. And sometimes you get those that say, there's no law that's being broken here, or there's no law on the books that's being broken here. So we don't know what to do with this. And that leaves the survivor much more vulnerable than if they actually said, well, we don't understand this, but how can we figure this out? And trusting that the survivor is telling them the truth.
And I would imagine if they say that there's no law on the books, that's even more isolating for the survivor themselves because they're actually being told you're on your own.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things people don't realize, even with domestic violence, there are really particular laws. And it's going to vary by, there may be, like in the States, there may be a federal law. So it may be a countrywide law, but then other states here will have specific laws. So that may translate as well, like in Australia as well, where there's specific municipalities or, that have specific laws. And they don't always talk to each other either, right? They don't always talk to each other. So I'll give you an example. So the person who I was in the abusive relationship with, they lived in my city. They had a record in my city, but they had never been found guilty of anything. They've been arrested for it, but they had never been found guilty of anything. And so what did they do? They moved to another county, still in the same state, but they moved in another county. And now they have a charge for, assault on a female, same as they had here. No one's talking to each other. And so you can uphold the law in one place, but if that person leaves, it's like a whole new reset,
Yeah, and that makes it a lot harder and unnecessarily so because the technology that's being used to actually perpetrate domestic violence, it can actually make things a lot easier for law enforcement as well, which was actually going to be my next question is if we, instead of looking at how technology could potentially be used to torment people, on the other side, how could it actually be used to help survivors of domestic violence and actually give them the tools to either move away, protect themselves, actually get their independence back?
Yep, absolutely. So there are some legislation, and I believe, if I remember correctly, and I apologize to your audience if I'm getting it wrong, but I feel like there's also something in place in Australia where if you move, you can have it so that your address doesn't show up anywhere. And so that is an added sense of security. And if I'm wrong about that, I apologize. I know we do have it here, and I could have sworn I looked it up and it was also there as well. But you can hide your address. And so that gives you an extra layer of security. There are some phone carriers that will allow you to change your number if you've experienced intimate partner violence. Some companies will even give you a new phone, and which I love, and I think that's super supportive. So there's these little things that happen that the issue often is, and it goes back to awareness, whether it's awareness in the workplace or awareness with survivors. Sometimes survivors don't know that these things are available. It's so much that you're bombarded with that it's like, I'm really just trying to go day to day, but I know I need to take care of myself. I know I need to be safe. And I know this because I know no one's truly going to come save me. I'm going to have to save myself. And so how can I do that? And it's knowing all of these different things, even these different opportunities. I didn't know this when the situation happened with me and I needed to leave my apartment. I didn't realize that they legally were supposed to move me to another apartment. Legally, they were supposed to move me to another apartment. They never said a word. So we have to know what's available to us. We have to know that too. I didn't know that I could have applied for some survivor fund to get money to help me. I didn't know that. And money is a big barrier a lot of times. So yes, I want a new phone to ensure that I'm not being tracked, but can I really afford it? at this time, right? So all of those factors, all those things factor into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's unfortunate.
And I imagine that there'd be in the back of a survivor's mind too, that if, they need another phone, but what if that partner finds the other phone? To look up what your rights are, well, what if they're tracking what you're looking up? So I imagine there's another element there that
Yeah.
makes it even more complicated to find out what those rights and, I guess, resources are.
So I do think that survivors have so much on their plates trying to figure everything out. And that's why I think it's important that those around them also know how they can be supportive. So, how can family and friends and neighbors and again, employers, how can they be supportive so that they can help them during this time where, especially if they've left, how can they get back on their feet? Or if they're choosing to leave, what does safety planning look like for them? So, I don't leave. Again, we have to get out of this idea that domestic violence is only between two people and it only impacts two people, but they're family members, they're friends, they're our neighbors. It was my neighbors who called the cops when I needed them the most. It was my neighbors. It wasn't me. It was my neighbors, which is also why I think that the cops came and was much more energetic about solving this than previously. So we have to understand that it is all of our jobs to disrupt domestic violence, not just the person who's experiencing it.
Yeah. Okay. So for listeners of this podcast who are designing and installing technology systems in homes, and this is across the board, not necessarily just in a domestic violence environment, but
Mm-hmm.
how could they shift how they think about designing for, I guess, safety in mind?
Yeah.
Obviously, even if there's not a situation, but just in general, what would help in the long run if it does turn into a domestic violence situation, those kind of underlying
Yeah.
principles to start with? So what should they be thinking when they are designing these systems?
I love that question. I really do, because I'm going to give you the answer from a survivor centered perspective. So if you're coming to me and you're saying, hey, we're installing this new technology, I want to know what happens in the case of emergency. What happens if I no longer have access to it? Or what happens if someone else has access to it that I no longer want them to have? Is there proof that I need to show you that I am in this situation where I can get some added support? What are some backdoor things that it can only be built for someone who's experiencing domestic violence? What does that look like? It could even be conversations that you have with the client ahead of that. So, when we normalize having the conversation, when we normalize talking about domestic violence, we're not, shunning ourselves or shunning the conversation. So we can say, "Hey, we do this work. We're bringing in this tech, and we also recognize that sometimes people are in relationships where technology is being used to control them. We want to make sure everyone is safe. What is it that we need to do to ensure that someone that's experiencing domestic violence is safe?" We want to have those questions. The other part is in the building process or even in the reiteration of a tool that you all have created, getting a group of survivors together. We do a lot of focus groups, but sometimes we need to get a little more granular and a little more niche to say, okay, we want to make sure that everyone feels safe in utilizing our tools. And so this group may have a unique perspective, and how can we get their voices into that room? So that's a big part of it. It's really just listening and having conversations. And out of those conversations, there's a dialogue happening. You're asking this person, you're asking me as a survivor what I need. And then I'm asking you, like, well, can this be done? If the product is already done, right? We always do 2.0, 3.0. We have to be open to those, being flexible with that. So it's really just listening, getting different voices in that. And I know that that happens even in building anything. But then if it's already built, again, if it's already built at that moment and you want to ensure that you're keeping someone safe, ask them, what would safety look like in utilizing this product, right? How can we ensure that it stays in the hands of the people that it needs to? And if it needs to be taken out of the hands of someone, what is that process like?
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing there about taking it away from perpetrators.
Mhm.
Obviously a way to, you're not necessarily accusing someone of something, but there
Right.
needs to be a process in place where it can be done in a non-inflammatory way, which
Yeah.
again adds another layer of complexity into the entire process of designing and installing these systems.
Yeah. Definitely. But in the end, it can be very beneficial. And I say again, CYA, because if someone tells you, hey, this person should not have access anymore because they have done this, this, and this using your technology, and you don't do anything about it, that can come back to bite you. Every single time, it can come back to bite you. So if you don't want to see it from the perspective of just like supporting the survivor or, being that kind of supportive, see it from a financial perspective. What's the risk of not addressing it? How much is it going to cost you to not actually address it?
Well, that's it. And that's a conversation I've had previously with someone. It's because this has not been tested in court from an integrator's perspective of saying, I installed technology in the home for someone and it was used in a nefarious way. So what is the fallout for the integrator? And I, for one, would not want to be the first integrator to go through that process
That's
because
right.
it's not going to
That's
end
right.
well for them.
hmm And that
So,
way, that integrator can say, hey, I know that this happened and I'm sorry that this happened. Here are the steps that we took to ensure.
mhm.
So now you see why, right? Here are the steps. It's like, okay. Okay. Well, then we're good because you took all the steps. It's when we don't take the steps, when we don't acknowledge that we need to cover some things, we need to make sure that we're covering all of our bases. That's when we can run into some trouble. Yeah.
So for those integrators who are going into people's homes, how do we educate them to look for those red flags? And what are those red flags that they should be looking for, whether it's something they've been asked about or something they just notice
Mhm.
in a home? And what responsibility do they have then to act on it?
Yeah. Yeah. So some of the red flags they may see is that if someone is dominating the conversation, like they're the person that's saying, you only talk to me, even if the other partner is there, but you only talk to me. You only address me. It's a dominating energy that this integrator is experiencing. This person is really coming off as, I know it all. I'm the one that's controlling this. You talk to me. I'm the one paying for this. Don't talk to that person. Talk to me. That is a red flag, right? Because they're totally ignoring the person who they're going to be impacted by it as well. So that's a red flag. Another red flag is just how the person who may be experiencing abuse, like how are they engaging with you? Are their eyes down? Are they not talking to you? Are they looking at them before they answer you? Because that just means that they don't speak unless they are allowed to speak. And that is something that we notice, right? Or if the person says, yes, we live together, but they don't need to know the login information. That is a red flag because that's not partnership, right? So that is a red flag. And what I would suggest when those moments happen really smoothly, oh, you know what? I think I need to reschedule. Absolutely forgot this thing that I needed to do this, and I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. I apologize. But let's reschedule. I'm going to talk to my supervisor when we can get you back on a schedule. Again, I apologize. And you leave. And then you have the conversation with your supervisor to say, I think something's up and I'm a little nervous about that. And they can evaluate it. They can, that's where training goes along as well, too, is training the supervisors of how they support the folks that are going out there and, as integrators. So those are just some of the red flags that generally show up in instances like that, of like someone else is dominating the situation more than anyone else. That's just a smooth way to kind of get yourself out the situation and then reevaluate.
So you mentioned there about doing potential education. And as a tech industry, we're all about certifications and letters after names and and badges. Are there programs that are recognized probably as being the industry standard of what they
Mhm.
could look to actually do to become certified or qualified or just educated in what they should be doing? Is there a gold standard that they should look for?
You know, there isn't a gold standard. There are some organizations that do provide certifications in domestic violence, especially, in the workplace. I provide training. You do get a certificate, but it's not a certification, which is, a little different. Well, a lot different, really. But So there isn't really a gold standard to it. There should be. This is how you address it. This is how you respond to it. It should be a gold standard, but there isn't really one. I haven't found one yet that's like, this is the one. And that's unfortunate because it's an opportunity where, to your point, if people like really want to know and they want to be certified in that, then yeah, that would be a great opportunity. And unfortunately, it's really a matter of finding the right trainer who understands all of these different layers, finding the right trainer that can actually train or build out a training specifically for your organization too. That's something that takes place as well. I've done that myself where I've just built out the training specifically for an organization. So it's my basic one, but it's tweaked a little bit. So that's another opportunity, but there isn't a gold standard across the board and there's no like, I have the certificate, so boom, I know all the things. It's not quite like that yet. Yet.
That's it. Watch this space. Is that what you're saying? Is this something might be coming?
I mean, you never know, right? I'm here for it. You never know at this point. You're giving me ideas, Paul.
I like to think I'm helpful sometimes. Some people might disagree with that, but I have my moments. So for people listening to this, so integrators listening to this, they'll get to the end of this podcast and say, okay, I want to, contribute meaningfully to this. I know I might need to change something that I do when I go out to houses, or it might even trigger a memory of a property they've worked in. And it might have put up some red flags now after it's happened. What's the first step that they should take after this?
Yeah, so I would say the first step that integrators should do is really investigate and understand the dynamics of domestic violence, understanding technology's role in the abuse and the continued abuse, understanding what a survivor is going through and experiencing can then help you get a better understanding so that you can be much more empathetic and supportive. You may not necessarily take any action right then and there, but you have that awareness, you have that knowing, you have that understanding. That's the first step. You didn't ask for a second step, but I'm gonna give you a second step too. A second step would be to investigate stories that are happening where technology is being used to abuse someone or continue the abuse. That way you have a frame of reference and you can see something and say like, oh, okay, I see how they use technology to abuse, and here's what I would have done differently, or here's what, some gaps that we may have. So those are two steps, but I think those are the really core ones. And then you move into other things. So really quickly, my framework for when I do my trainings, regardless of what sector that they're in, is the ABCs of disruption. ABCs stand for awareness, belonging, and change. So we want to build our awareness of what domestic violence is, how it impacts the sector that we're in, how it impacts us as individuals. Then we want to go into belonging. How do we create a space so that survivors feel safe to share, feel like they can come to you for resources, and there's no fear around that, and creating that space of belonging. And then we want to develop some change. What are the things that we need to change? Sometimes it's the internal, like our biases around domestic violence and intimate partner violence. We want to change those beliefs that we have. Then other change can be, again, policies that we have, procedures to addressing it, and even protocols that we may have. So ending domestic violence will not just take you and I. It won't just take survivors. It won't just take family, friends. Ending it takes also people who are abusive getting the help that they need so that they don't keep abusing. And also, we may not be able to end it, but we can disrupt it. And so those are the ways in which we can disrupt it, by building awareness, by creating belonging, and by effecting change. And so each of the different things, that task or different ways that we approach it, fall into those different categories. And so you can start off with that awareness and then build up from there.
So I'm interested then on a personal level, as a survivor, as someone who works in the sector, what kind of emotional toll has this taken on you for everything that you see? Surely you've got to carry that with you in some way.
I don't carry it long. Thank you for asking that. So one of the things is I'm much more distant from it. So like I said, it's been almost 10 years since I've experienced that. So there's some distance around that. Therapy has absolutely helped a lot. It has absolutely helped a lot. But also, it was just a matter of me realizing that what I experienced wasn't my fault. I experienced it, it was real, but it wasn't my fault. And so I can take that blame and that shame and leave it where it belongs, nowhere near me. That's one. And two, when people tell me their stories, I'm honored for that because that means I've built a sense of trust for them that they can share that with me. And I don't hold on to it because it's not mine to hold. I'm not here to save survivors. To be clear, like I'm not here to save them. I'm here to support them. The other thing is I'm really big on my own self-care and doing the same tools that I use with survivors in terms of building their self-trust and their self-love and their compassion. I use for myself too. And if I ever feel overwhelmed, I generally will take a break. I absolutely will take a break and understand that it's okay for me to do that too. So the last thing I will say is I think that as a survivor, the reason why I'm able to do this work is because I'm supposed to do this work. The reason why I'm able to do this work is because I'm supposed to do this work. It doesn't feel heavy. It doesn't. It doesn't feel heavy at all. And I thought it would. And people ask me, I get that question a lot, honestly, but people do ask me, and I'm like, it doesn't feel heavy. I feel very much in alignment with what I'm doing. So even this conversation is in alignment with, I want us to have different conversations around domestic violence.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So finally then, people listening to this podcast, not just Australians, I do have people in the US as well listening to this. How do they reach out to you? How do they get involved with Courageous Shift and support you and your mission? And where to from here?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I am on all platforms as I am Melody Co. That's IAMMELODYCO. All platforms: Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. I think even my LinkedIn one is that too as well. But Melody C. Gross, you can always find me on LinkedIn. And my website is courageousshift.com. And I'm really accessible. Like generally I'm everywhere. So at any time, I receive messages all the time. It's totally okay if you're like, I hated this podcast episode and I don't like what you do. And you don't know what you're talking about. Okay, that's fine. Tell me more. Right. Or you can say, which I hopefully say is like, I want to do more. I think that my organization does need a little bit of guidance with that. How can we work with you? I'm here for that as well, too. So I am Melody Co. on all platforms. And then just looking up my name, Melody C. Gross, is easy as well, too.
Thank you to Melody Gross for sharing her story, her insights, and her courage. For a lot of us working in this space, technology is about convenience, comfort, and maybe even luxury. But for someone in crisis, it could be a lifeline or a weapon. That makes your role as an integrator more important than ever. It's not just about what the system can do. It's about who can use it, how, and why. Melody said something that stuck with me. Survivors are experts in their own safety. If we can listen to those voices and build systems that support and not endanger that safety, we're doing more than just a job. We're helping to change lives. If this episode stayed with you or raised questions or made you think differently about your work, please reach out. You can find me on LinkedIn or email me directly at info@masterintegrator.com.au. I'd love to continue the conversation. Also, a quick reminder, Master Integrator merchandise is coming. It's a simple way to support the show, start more of these important conversations, and show you're part of a community that cares about how doing this work can be better. Thanks again to our sponsors, Chords and Connected Magazine, for making today's conversation possible. Until next time, design with care, install with purpose, and never underestimate the power of feeling safe in your own home. Thanks for listening to Master Integrator. I'm Paul Skelton. I'll see you next time.